It just speaks to the power of mentorship. Mentorship, doesn't necessarily have to be it's in any environment where someone has already been down that road and they truly have empathy and care for your direction.
Yeah.
To impart some aspect of wisdom and possibility for you to achieve the goals that are necessary for you to progress. Hello, my friend, and welcome to this Wednesday episode of A Call to Leadership. I'm Dr. Nate Saul, your host. I'm so glad you are here. Well, I am so excited to present part 3 of this 4-part series with Jeremy Smith on his journey in missions, in life, from a difficult childhood into prison, and his conversion story in jail on this part 3. So inspiring. Can't wait for you to listen in. This is A Call to Leadership. Jeremy, so good to have you back on the show.
Nate, it's as if we never left.
Right?
I wonder if I'm wearing the same shirt.
You are not wearing the same shirt. I thought it was a dark colored shirt. We left a cliffhanger with our last episode, 2 episodes actually, as we're walking through, interestingly, of course, this idea of morality and objective morality, but from the framework of your journey, your personal journey into ministry, and maybe some parallels we've talked about with some of the things that I've experienced that our audience would know about. Really this idea of how you began to form your moral landscape. And we left the cliffhanger in prison. And if you're listening now and you hadn't listened to the first 2 installments, you have to go back. I would actually encourage you to stop here, go back to the first 2 episodes that Jeremy and I had together, because they're foundational, instrumental of understanding how he even landed in prison. But you're there and something is happening. Obviously, you are a captive individual. But as I want to take a couple steps back, because someone listening is saying, okay, I've never been to prison, and I hear it can be very stressful, especially as you're thinking about what's going to happen here. You hear about all kinds of very bad things.
Well, sure.
That happen in prison.
Plus we watch movies and, of course we hear.
Were those things happening around you?
I wouldn't say around me. In terms of best case scenario versus worst case scenario, my situation was closer to best case scenario. What I mean by that is, first of all, the bulk of my time away, and I was gone for like a year and a week. So it was not an insignificant amount of time. But the bulk of my time was actually in county jail in, a pretty soft county with, not a lot of people coming in and out. And so it was actually it was certainly boring and stressful, because there were always court dates and unknowns. And do we have money for a lawyer? Am I going to go to jail for 10 years or 5 or 3, right? I don't know. Or prison, I mean. Anyway, but it was chill. There wasn't a lot of action in county jail. And I was there for 7 months waiting for a jury trial.
Now you were how old?
17.
17.
Yeah, but I was being tried as an adult.
You tried as an adult. Yeah. Were you making friends in jail?
Make friends everywhere.
Yeah, I figured.
This is one of one of my gifts, maybe a curse, if my motives aren't right. But I had lots of friends, and in that particular county, there were a couple of neighboring towns. Because I got in trouble in a small town, even though I had lived in a big city. I moved back to a small town to get out of trouble, ironically. I should say my mom moved us back to a small town. I was mad. I was so angry that she did that. But anyway, so I'm in a small town, and I got in trouble in a small town, and everybody kind of knows everybody. And I had some history with other kids in other, towns. And I had some friends in there already, right? And I want to say this is so important. Even though they were in jail, some of these guys are good guys. I still keep in contact with one of these guys to this day. just had breakfast with him a couple months ago. I gave him a skateboard
Nice.
as a gift, right? And so I'm meeting, new people for sure, and I'm pretty social, and I know how to, hold my own in terms of posturing.
Right.
I wasn't the biggest guy. I think I was like $145, when I was wet and wearing combat boots, right? But I knew how to make friends.
You make friends. So
Yes.
you're in county jail. You've made friends. However, prison is a real possibility.
It's almost inevitable.
Inevitable.
Yeah.
Guarantee. Almost guaranteed.
Yeah.
Are you thinking, okay, it's going to get much worse. I don't know what to expect. What's going through your head?
Well, so were it not for these friends I mentioned, one of them who had been to prison before, I think I would have expected the absolute worst. Like, I would have taken the craziest movie that I had ever seen and like magnified that by 1,000,000 because I was such a small, young, pretty boy, right? But after talking with some of these guys and getting some insider info, it was like, well, here's how it really works, right? When you end up when you leave here, your first destination will probably be receiving at some prison that's designed for temporary reception of inmates while they're waiting to be sent to their final destination. So a buddy of mine said, the good news about that is in receiving, not everybody, but most people behave because they don't want to be sent to gladiator school, right?
Right.
So let's say that you were sentenced to, 5 years in a minimum security place or whatever, or 5 years in a medium even. Like, if you mess up in receiving, if you get in a fight, if you get extra charges, a lot of times they just throw the book at you. And this is not in the court system, really. Like, there's an internal prison system, right, that will like fast forward your charges. And so if you're convicted of a certain charge in prison and that gets to the judge, it's like just fast tracked, right? There's no jury trial or anything, at least not typically, from what I understand. If I'm wrong about that, then forgive me, audience. But the bottom line is that I was surrounded by people that were, hardened criminals. And I guess you could say, including me. I was in there for aggravated battery, and it was my third offense.
Yeah.
So I was no better or worse, right, than most of the people.
You almost killed someone.
I did, man. And unintentionally,
right,
in terms of severity, but intentional in terms of wanting to hurt someone, right?
You weren't trying to kill him.
I was certainly not trying to kill him.
Yeah. I
just wanted him to stop beating up my friend.
Right.
Him and his, 7 or 8 buddies, right? But I was in there. There were murderers. As a matter of fact, my cellmate was a 17-year-old. By that time I was 18. He was a 17-year-old. His first name was Jody. I won't mention his last name, but he was from a town not far from mine, and he was in prison for attempted murder. And this is really interesting. You'd probably appreciate this. He grew up, without a dad, not a lot of positive male influences. He ended up linking up with gang members. And these were the first guys that, took him under their wing, showed him the ropes, affirmed him. They seemed to care about him, which, wasn't the case. And I'll get to that. But so he got involved in this gang, and some girl that was kind of like a friend of a gang member, ripped some guy off for a couple $100, right? Couple $100. And Jody was tasked with killing her. He's 17. He might have been 16 at the time of the incident. And so, and this is graphic, but it's just reality. So, there are a bunch of guys in a car. She was actually not driving her own car. She was in the passenger seat. Jody was sitting behind her, certain signal, a word or whatever, and Jody tried to cut her throat. And he did cut her throat, but she didn't die. They dumped her body they dumped her. It wasn't just a body. It was a human, an alive human, right? Thank God. But she didn't die, and she ended up crawling to some farmhouse through a cornfield, like bleeding out, man. And it was a miracle that she lived. And so he wasn't in there for murder, but it was attempted murder. And he was doing 46 years. So that was his nickname, 46. Anyway, but I remember him just saying, like, I didn't want to do it. He's like, but I had no choice. Or, well, he felt like he had no choice. And you could just tell, like, remorse was all over this kid, all over him. And I'll never forget the time I spent with him, and it was just, I was in receiving. It's awesome, actually, because like the movies, like I'm going in, I'm scared. I am scared, even though I had been adequately prepped. I am scared. And even though I'd been spending 7 months, like working out every day, I would fill pillowcases full of books because we didn't have access to weights in county. And I would just be doing, whatever I could do, right? And I'm doing pull-ups on my bunk, push-ups. I'm running in place. And I was probably in like the best shape of my life. I was still a little guy, but I was cut like Bruce Lee.
Yeah, right.
And so, I was ready for it mentally and physically, I guess. But I was so scared going in. And I'm sitting in this like waiting area, and there was an old guy, like this old black guy. He was getting out. And I don't know. I mean, old's such a relative term. Maybe he was in his 40s or 50s.
Right.
As a 17-year-old, everybody seems old, right? But this guy, he started chatting with me, and there was only like this kind of screen thing between us. And he's like, this your first time? I was like, yeah, man. He's like, he's like, let me give you some advice. And we talked about more than just this, but after some trust was established, he's like, let me give you some advice. He said, you'll be all right. He said, don't gamble. Don't get into any debts. Mind your own business. Don't run your mouth. He said, and the most important thing, he said, don't hold your head too high. Don't hold your head too low. He said, just keep it level. And I mean, even to this day, it's like, wow, thank God. Like this older man sensed that this younger man needed some guidance. And even though, we're both convicts, right? And he had been, you could tell he had been in and out, but he cared about me, right? And wanted to give me this advice. It was good advice.
Yeah, it just speaks to the power of mentorship, right? I mean, you think mentorship, doesn't necessarily have to be it's in any environment where
right?
Someone has already been down that road and they truly have empathy and care for your direction.
Yeah.
To impart some aspect of wisdom and possibility for you to achieve the goals that are necessary for you to progress.
Yeah. Amen. And thank God that this guy offered me that advice, because I followed, well, for the most part, I followed his advice.
Did you gamble?
I did not gamble. I've never had an issue really with gambling. Although you could say skateboarding is a gamble every time you hop on it. I didn't, my thing was my mouth.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was hard for me to shut up, right? Like, and I'm a mouthy guy, and I'm quick-witted.
Sure.
And so if I want to say something, I usually say it.
Yeah.
Or at least the old me.
Yeah.
I'm much better at
17,
it. 17,
yeah.
Yeah. So I had some close calls, but the cool thing was that I can draw a little bit. Like, I'm not the world's greatest artist, but I can sketch, and I have, maybe better than average talent there. And, I was just drawing to pass the time, and some dudes like caught wind that I could draw. And so I ended up becoming an, entrepreneur basically in,
nice.
and Graham Medium Security Penitentiary. Right. And so I had a lot of traffic in and out, and most of the stuff I just did as favors. 'Cause again, I wasn't like trying to get into like money transactional sort of, situations with crooks, right? So I would try to like, just be cool about it and be like, yo, man, like, oh, you got a kid at home, bro? I got, I got brothers. Like, I know what that's like. Let me just draw this up for you. And like, I've made a lot of friends like that. And then sometimes I would do trades, with people that I trusted,
right,
quote unquote, right?
Yeah, right. In that context.
Yes,
Yeah.
in that context, right? But I had a lot of traffic, and I didn't even realize this till later. But that probably helped me out a lot too, because everybody knew that I was cool with everybody, and so that was really helpful. It was really helpful.
That's fascinating.
There's another bit too.
Yeah.
I may have my mouth was pretty close to getting me into serious trouble. I'd kind of smarted off to some dude, right, that was a little bigger and a little meaner than me. And he wanted to fight. And, again, we're in prison, right? These prison rules. And he kind of called me out and in front of people. And I'm like, all right, then, let's do this. And inside, I'm like, I'm going to throw away. And I forgot to mention, this is so important. I actually, surprisingly, at the last second, like ninth inning in my court proceedings, I qualified for an alternative prison program. So 7 months in county. And then I got sentenced to 3 years. And I ended up plea bargaining with the state's attorney because my mom couldn't afford a really good attorney. And it was just the best option, right? Like, arguably maybe a jury trial would have been great. But then again, dumb kids. My friend, we're still friends today, and I'll get back on track. But the guy that I protected, we still talk. Like I just talked with him a couple of days ago, sending him some old pictures and stuff. Like we're still friends. But even though we were telling the truth, the depositions and like the police reports, it seemed like we were lying. Like that's how dumb we were, right? Like, or hyped up on emotion or embellishment. I don't know exactly, but neither one of us were like lying, but it seemed like we were. And so with that said, with 2 prior, incidents, and because I was in a small town, big fish, small pond, I just ended up taking a plea bargain. Not to mention they continued my case so many times. I was just rotting. I was rotting in county jail. That's a tactic, by the way, that happens, that's that lower socioeconomic class. Even though I'm a straight white male, like I could have rotted in county jail until I decided to plea because we didn't have money for a great attorney and we didn't have a great representation.
So you could be throwing this away by this fight.
So thank you for getting me back on track.
Yeah.
That is right. Yeah. I got sentenced to 3 years with the option of impact incarceration, which is modeled after the Marine Boot Camp program. And it is a privilege. Not every first time, it's only for first time offenders. And I was a first time adult offender. So not everybody gets it, but you could have a sentence up to 10 years and you could be anywhere from, like 18, or in my case, tried at 17, but 18 to 30, right? So 10-year sentence, 18 to 30-year-olds, some people qualify for this, first-time offenders. Here's the trick. If you make it through boot camp, you get to go home early. It's a 4-month program. Now, you might wait a couple or even a few months to get in because of the bed rotation, right? But once you're in, you're guaranteed you are out in 120 days.
Wow.
And then 90-day ankle bracelet, so house arrest, and then a year of parole, and that's it. Then you're done. I mean, you have a record, but you're out. And so the trick was, if you made it, you made it. If you didn't, then you had to go serve your sentence.
And how long? In 3 years.
For me, it was 3 years.
Yeah. So 4 months or 3 years.
That's exactly right.
Wow.
Now, granted, with all the time served in county and with,
Good
day
behavior.
for day, good behavior, like, it might
Right.
not have been that much
Sure.
longer, but still, better option. Even if it shaves off a month, I'm going for
It's
it.
a month lesson.
But Nate, here's the crazy thing, man. Talking about like impulse control and attitude and even ethics and morals. If you made it, you made it. If you got kicked out, you served your sentence. If you quit, you served your sentence. I saw more guys quit voluntarily. I don't even know if I saw a dude get kicked out. I saw a lot of dudes quit. I saw dudes with 8-year sentences that quit.
Was it physically, mentally
Yes.
challenging?
Yes, yes, and yes. So it was similar to the Marine boot camp program in terms of physical training. Okay. Different in terms of like, we didn't learn how to shoot guns, right? So
yeah, I can see that.
so it was a lot. I mean, it was early to bed, early to rise. It was physical training 3 times a day, like multiple mile runs, lots of aggressive, like torture tactic exercises.
Yeah.
You had to do 10 pull-ups before each meal. If you couldn't do a pull-up, the guys on either side of you had to lift you up, right? It was big time intense.
Which I would suspect, knowing you today, you were built for high challenge situations.
Oh, yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
I didn't even know I was until then. There were certain things that, like certain challenges that I would meet and rise to the occasion. This is one that was just forced upon me. And arguably, it's one of the, certainly top 3 hardest things I've ever dealt with, right? Physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. And yet, it was awesome. And I could not believe it, Nate, when I saw dudes quitting that had longer sentences than mine. And why did they quit? Because some officer disrespected them, or because they didn't want to do another push-up. Like I remember I was like, man, I don't care. Like, I'm either going to pass out or puke.
Right.
And I'm not quitting. Like, there's nothing that's going to keep me from going home early. And I had all kinds of things happen that were hard and that sucked. And there's just a tiny little funny story, but one time I only had like a couple of weeks left. So I had what we call short timer's disease, right? Meaning that, I wasn't trying to get kicked out, but I was not minding my P's and Q's, right? And I had managed to score a job as a dorm porter, basically janitorial work. Throughout the day, you were either on a work crew or you either worked in the facility. Work crews went all over the place doing community service. I was in the facility. So I got this mop and a bucket and I'm mopping the floors, and there's a whole van load of new inmates that came in. We call them ghosts because for the first week they wore these white jumpsuits, right? And I remember being a ghost because it was just, a few months earlier, right? And you don't know anything, you don't know the rules, and you're getting demerits. Like demerit is a little card you keep in your pocket. If you break a rule, officer grabs your card, punches the thing. After you get 10, you do a motivation. I'll tell you what that is later if you want, but we can get back to the subject of morality. But this is a fun side note. I got in huge trouble because these ghosts came in, and again, my mouth, right? My mouth. I walk over to the door. I was like, "Yeah, what's up, ghosts? How y'all feeling? Oh, hi. They shaved your head. Good thing you didn't shave your eyebrows, right? Like when they tell you to shave all the hair off your face. I saw a dude. He ended up shaving his eyebrows off because he was so frazzled, right? And
so you're taunting them.
I was taunting them, and that was actually a true story. There was a kid that started shaving his eyebrows, and the officer was like, "What are you doing, inmate?" He's like, "Sir, you said to shave all the hair off my face, sir, not your eyebrows, you." And it really was like the movies in that regard.
Right.
They were bumping us, and they took all of our stuff and threw it in a pile, gave us 30 seconds to find our shoes. It was nuts. And it was nonstop, just trouble after trouble, discipline after discipline. And you always got in trouble, even if the guy next to you was the one causing the trouble. Everybody got disciplined in groups, man. And there was a valuable lesson in that, right? Because one of the things they said was, even if you're keeping your locker in check and you got your shoes shined and you're doing the right things, people you hang out with, if they're not doing that, you're going down with them. It was an important, lesson. Anyway, so these ghosts, I'm taunting them, I'm messing with them, I'm starting to, pipe off at the mouth. And eventually I'm like, yeah, you got to watch out for that Officer Keener. Like, that guy, man, he'll torture you, he's a real whatever, another, and this and that. And these dudes are like staring at me, and I mean, just wide-eyed, jaws dropped. And I thought that it was because I was telling such compelling stories. I'm not even kidding, dude. Officer Keener was standing behind me for I don't know how long, but long enough to hear his name and long enough to hear me talking trash.
Oh, no.
So, again, I'm so sorry. I'm coming to you today, like my brain's just racing, but so I got tortured for the better part of the day. That was like right after lunch. And when the sun went down, I was still being tortured. And what I say by torture is, it was all legal, right? And it was appropriate. But I remember we had some flooding and from the pond, and it came up under this field, and he gave me a paint bucket and a styrofoam cup. And he was like, I need you to drain that pond. I'm just like, what, sir? That's impossible. He's like, well, I guess you'll be here a little longer, And so I was taking the styrofoam cup and pouring it into the bucket. And when the bucket was full, I had to double time it to the other side of the facility. And so he got bored with that. And then he had me take these logs and move them from one side of the facility to the other. And then he just kept messing with me like, oh, sorry, inmate, I made a big mistake. I actually need those on the other side. And it was just all day of that, right? Yeah. Anyway, sorry.
No,
But none of that could break me. Like,
right.
No matter what they did to me, I'm like, I am 1 minute closer to home.
Except for the potential of not going home because of a fight.
Oh, dang, man. So maybe you'll have to do some editing, so this will be more linear.
Yeah.
Back in the receiving area, my mouth got me into some trouble, and this dude challenged me to a fight in front of other people. Nate, we were literally like walking down the aisle to walk into a cell and have a few guys watching outside so we could just duke it out. And there was a bit of a crowd too. And while I'm posing and posturing, in my head, I'm thinking two things. One, I'm not going to win this fight. Like, unless I gouge his eyes out or something, which I'm not ready to do that at this stage in my career. Like, and two, I'm throwing away my boot camp option. Now we're back to where we were. My boot camp option. So I'm walking and I'm trying to find the words. Like, how do I get out of this? And I eventually just stopped. I looked at the dude. I was like, I got nothing to fight for, bro. He's like, what you mean? Like, we heading in. I'm like, no. I was like, dude, I think I was in the wrong. Like, I should have just said I was sorry. I was like, I think that what I did was wrong. Like, I shouldn't have been mouthing, like it wasn't my business. And I was like, I can't really fight you because I got nothing to fight for. Right. Like, you're right and I'm wrong. And that was a risky move, right? Because, it's all about honor, right? You're either a predator or a punk in this environment. And I remember, and I didn't realize it at the time, but there was this other dude, kind of a bigger guy, and he had been in and out of my cell, right? I can't remember if I had traded or just given him some drawings for his girlfriend at home, but he stood in the middle of us. And he was like, he kind of came in and he said, you're making the right decision. And he said it loud, like, so everybody could hear. He said, you're a man. He's like, you're making the right decision. He said, there's nothing here to gain. He said, you're making the right decision. And he kind of said it loud, like everybody could hear it, right? I don't know if this is true or not. It might have just been, he just felt like saying that. It also might have been that he was trying to protect me.
Yeah.
Because he affirmed a few things. you're a man. You're making the right decision. Like, he didn't call me a punk, right? And luckily, right, by God's grace, and by the way, I had become a Christian at this point. Like, I became a Christian in county. But yeah, man, the dude that wanted to fight me, I mean, he basically just said, all right then, like, keep your mouth shut, right? I'm like, hey man, cool, whatever. Like, we cool, we're cool. That was the end of it. But I could have lost my boot camp. I could have done 3 years. I could have went to the penitentiary and just became a better and more networked criminal.
Right.
Boot camp was the best thing that ever happened to me.
That was an interesting moment for you.
For sure.
Even that moment of reflection and introspection. Were you 17 or 18 at the time?
18, yeah.
So you were 18 years old. I mean, I remember when I was 18, and I'm sure we share a similar sort of mouthiness and grit and just sarcasm. So at 18, it would have been really difficult for me to not get in that fight. And I'm sure you were in the same situation to where you were thinking of ways like, okay, this is dumb. I'm getting into this fight, but it's just not the right move. And the fact that you were, I mean, just the way you approach it, there's no better way to approach it. I don't think that if you probably thought about those moments throughout your life.
God's grace, man.
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. Because it really takes tremendous discernment, even maturity in a way. I mean, you were young, but there's a certain maturity that comes alongside of says, hey, it's just not worth it. This path is not worth the cost. And I'm willing to risk my honor to do what I would consider is technically what's right? To say, hey man, that was me. That was me. Man, that's you cannot understate that experience. But going back, I wonder what parts of your psyche and your spirit had changed in that process, because
lots.
Yeah, because you had a spiritual awakening. That's what Wilberforce calls it, right? When he had his awakening, right? Mm-hmm. And this awakening over several months had begun to change you from the inside out. And was it in county that an individual impacted you? Was it a book? Was it someone from the outside? What happened in county?
The first two are correct. It was an individual, 2 individuals to be exact, and it was a book. So on my way in, I was the kid that would hit someone in the face with a bat to level the playing field. I was also the kid that would steal from my mother, that would sleep with my buddy's friends, right? That I had seared my internal compass, right? Jiminy Cricket on my shoulder, little angel, little devil. Like, I had silenced Jiminy Cricket and the angel, and so that's important to note when I say that when I got saved through this book, through these 2 guys. So quick context, and I'll be brief, which is hard. I used to make fun of Christians when I was a kid, and partly because I kind of believed it when I was little. I think I actually really believed it when I was little. I don't know if I was saved or not, but I thought God was in heaven. I thought Jesus was his son. I figured Jesus did magic. He had a cool beard, and he wanted to live in my chest, according to my grandmother, right? Jesus is cool with me. I'm cool with him. And then when my mom started going through her own struggles and troubles, and particularly with a really abusive husband who was my stepdad for a time. I can't remember if I talked about that on the other one. I think I did. I would always pray, right? Like, just please, like, protect my mom. And my mom, as far as I could tell, wasn't being protected. So I was like, God, forget it. I'm done. I think you're real. And that makes this worse.
Right.
Like, yeah. I've asked you for help, man. And I'm not asking for a new bike. I'm not asking for a Nintendo. I'm just asking that you would keep my mom from getting beat up by her husband. It's a pretty selfless, sincere prayer from a little kid, right?
Yeah.
And so I just concluded that either God didn't care or didn't hear or a little bit of both. And so I would say, as I got older, I don't want to be a slave to a distant God who doesn't care about me and my mom. And in terms of slave, specifically, like, I don't want to be a slave to all these stupid rules that are designed to just keep me from having fun, you know? And so forget it. Like, I don't want to be a slave to that God. Rules are dumb, and he doesn't care about me and my mom. All right, now fast forward. I'm in county jail, and the book I was reading was the Bible. And I don't remember if I started reading the Bible and this happened, and then I started going to church in jail because they had a Sunday service. Or if I started going to church and then came back and started reading my Bible. I don't know which came first. But I was, 15 chapters into John's gospel. And Jesus says to his disciples, I'll paraphrase. He says, guys, I'm not calling you slaves. I'm calling you friends, right? And everything that my Father has made known to me, I'm making known to you. Clearly, you're not slaves. Slaves don't know their master's business. You're insiders. You're my friends. I'm calling you friends. And in that way, I think that's how I got interested. I became interested in apologetics. Now, I didn't know what that word meant. And I don't mean like the apologetic subculture where there's certain, popular philosophical topics about God's existence. I mean, I had a question that turned into an objection that turned into a huge roadblock. And what was that question? God, do you care about me? It wasn't even, God, are you there? God, are you real? I suspected that he was. It's like, God, are you for me? Do you care? Do you see what's happening here? Do you even care? And Jesus is like, of course I care, I care so much that I'm calling you my friends. And beyond that, I'm going to die for my friends, right? And this gospel that I'd kind of heard, but kind of not heard, like it just became so real. And I got saved, and I didn't check, I didn't check a box on a card. I didn't, raise my hand when nobody was looking. There was no emotional music playing. I didn't say any magic words. I just read the scriptures and heard what Jesus had to say and felt him just move all these roadblocks out of my way. Like all my little objections and counter arguments and my hang-ups, my doubts, like he just obliterated it and was like, here I am. Like I'm not what you think. I'm better, right? And I'm more, and I love you. And I just wept and wept and wept. And I'm telling you, like, there were things about my character and about my morals and my ethics, like my compass, that just straightened out immediately, miraculously. It wasn't through mentorship. It wasn't through, my heart just changed. It was like the Grinch who stole Christmas. And one moment he's got a tiny little heart, and the next moment it's too big for his chest. It's a weird.
Two sizes that day.
That's right? Exactly right. And you know what? It's funny, given the choice. Like if some, like who evangelist would have went up on the mountain and said, hey, Mr. Grinch, I've got an option for you. You can either continue hating us or you can say these magic words and love us. Like the Grinch would not have, through his own free will, chosen that option. I'm not trying to get into the weeds theologically, but all I can say is that I am thankful for a God who invaded my space, who in some ways, like, he did some pretty incredible things to get my attention. And he changed my heart. And so I got saved. And then I I really started taking church seriously inside this county jail. And there were two guys there, so important, Elmer and Lonnie. Now, Elmer actually was old. He probably was in his 80s at that time. He's, I'm sure, with the Lord now. It's very likely. Lonnie was probably in his mid-20s, but he seemed old, you know. And these two guys, I'm telling you, and again, apologetics. These two guys, not so much in word, but in deed, showed me that it's true. It's real. It has power. There's real power here. And the reason I believed that is because there were guys in church who were only there because it was something to do. And it was just another activity. And a couple of these guys, I mean, just, you know, one example, like there's no reverence, no respect. And they would take these hymns and they would rearrange the words to make it into like naughty songs, right? And I remember Lonnie and Elmer, like they had the power to just eject these guys, right? Like, you're not allowed to come back. They had that power. Lonnie actually, you know, as a guy who had been in and out of jail a few times, like he probably had the power to eject them physically, right? But what I saw demonstrated in these two guys was a meekness, not weakness. It was a different kind of strength, actually. Like they endured. They endured and they forgave and they kept showing up. You know, talk about, again, a kid that grows up like me having objections and questions. Like, I didn't even know my dad, I didn't even know my dad's name until I was 15. And that was by accident. I didn't even meet my dad until, gosh, it was almost 10 years later. And for these guys to keep showing up, like, man, how did they do that? It's a miracle. It's a miracle. And not to mention, like, if these guys, as imperfect as they are God's ambassadors, then I know God's showing up for me. And no matter how bad I am, he's not going to leave. He's going to be here every Sunday, every minute, every second. And these guys, through their actions, were actually doing Christian apologetics. They were showing me that it's plausible. It's even probable that it's true. How else would you explain this behavior? Sorry, I talk a lot. But
no, it gets me thinking about pivotal moments in life and where you were at the moment versus where you could have been had you. Now, of course, we don't ever want to cause harm and suffering, especially what happened with your altercation. However, that said, had you not been in that jail, would you have had, I mean, I know you've thought about this. Oh, yeah. Would you have had that experience?
So, on the one hand, if I had sort of a screwy kind of Back to the Future theological framework where, maybe I believe in alternate realities and timelines, or maybe the more contemporary example would be like a multiverse theory, right? Doctor Strange and Thanos and all of this Marvel stuff. On the one hand, it's possible that God could have used any number of things to get my attention. On the other, because I believe he's omniscient and I believe he's omnipotent and I believe he's, all good as well. I actually think that this was the optimal reality that he had, I'll use a scary word, predestined for me, right?
Scary word, yeah.
And yet, it was my own free choices that in some ways got me there, right? He didn't twist my arm. He wasn't causing me to make poor choices, right? And yet, again, all throughout Scripture, we see God using man's best choices, but also worst choices to bring about his providential will. Yeah. So, that's a big, lofty theological answer. I think, too, God is just faithful to deal with us according to our personalities. And I was the kid that you could warn me all day long that the stove was hot. But until I, brought back that blackened nub, I just wouldn't hear it, right? And so he knocked me off my high horse and blinded me and brought me to the place where I had nowhere else to look but up because I was at rock bottom, essentially.
Wow. And so you're on this journey. You get out of prison because you only had to serve. Is it 4 months?
Yeah,
in prison.
All in all, it ended up being about a year and a week. So
total.
Yeah, county jail, receiving, and then another halfway place, and then boot camp, and then I was out.
And you're out.
Yep.
And when you get out, what's changed in you from when you went in?
Specifically, I had a few of my own personal commandments. And some of this actually, kind of overlaps with AA, Alcoholics Anonymous. I completed AA. I completed NA. I got actually pretty good counseling. I mean, for me, back to your original question about, and I'll tell you what changed, but about prison, I had an upside down experience in prison. All the things that you think are going to happen, the bad things never really happened. And a lot of good things did. I got my GED. I got good counseling. I went through AA, NA. Boot camp was a positive experience for me. I get home. Here's what changed. My moral code, I was like, I'm going to be monogamous. Now, that's not, necessarily like God's perfect ideal, right?
Right.
Like marriage would have been closer to the target, right? But it was much closer to the target than my previous lifestyle because I was a womanizer. I mean, from probably 13 to 17, that was my sales goal, right? Like that was my sales job.
Right.
And I was decent at it, pretty good. So I'd committed to just having a committed relationship with one girl, which was a huge step for me, closer to the target, not further away from the target.
Right.
And then I also, I'd committed in my heart. It's going to be hard for me, because my mom had such a hard time, Nate. And a lot of it was unfair circumstances. And then a lot of it was also bad choices. It was kind of a combo deal for her. But when I behaved the way I behaved, misbehaved is a better term, I made a hard situation for my mom even harder. I mean, here's a gal that, just struggling mentally, physically, financially, and she's got a kid in prison, talk about stress, trying to scrape up $2,500 for a retainer. My mom could barely scrape up $100, and the way I treated her was just awful, maybe demonic. I don't know. I said some mean things to my mom, right? But prior to going to jail, and I made this commitment, Nate, to be the son that she deserved. And thank God I was able to keep that promise. And again, by God's grace, I was able to keep that promise. And then, however imperfect, but man, from 1997 until 2010 when she died, I was, to the best of my capability, like the golden boy. I gave my mom everything that I could give her as a son, Same with my grandma. That was another commitment that I had made, that I am going to love my grandmother. And in some ways, it was, hearkening back to the commandment to honor your mother and father. And I didn't know my dad. And most of the guys that I knew weren't that great, or at least father figures. But my mom and my grandma were basically my parents. And these were really the two people that I treated the worst too as a kid. And I just made that commitment.
Well, my friend, what a touching way to end this third installment of our 4-part series with Jeremy Smith and his journey. I absolutely am thrilled to just be a part of your journey as well. And if you're going to listen into the 4th installment, we encourage you to do that in just 1 week, but you don't have to wait a week. Stick around on Friday, and I'd love for you to be my special guest as we continue to grow as leaders together so we can aim for greatness in serving one another.